songwriter,
The photo is aging, droplets of sudden red.
Producer, composer, band leader, recording studio honcho, and the founder of Create Interesting Music, which is a mentorship program which helps creative guitarists develop into full-fledged artists.
A different apartment, so I'll have to figure out sound in that room. But yeah, lots of stuff going on. I've got a show on the 17th that I don't have a set for, so I'm like, okay, crunch time, what do I want to do? I have all these sketches, but I don't really want to bring my guitar and like practice and all that stuff, so I might just figure it out. There's a couple of different options we can talk about, but before we get into that, I have like 2 sketches. They're kind of close to what we were trying to do, but I just ended up finding things that I thought were interesting and being like, okay, let me flesh this idea out and then just talk about what we were trying to do. So if you want, we could go into that, and then we could talk about maybe some interesting strategies for what I could do in a couple weeks at this show.
Cool. Yeah.
Nice. So I'll set up. I gotta share audio and stuff, but let me share sound. And sharing sound means that like when I use iTunes, it'll play, right? I don't need to do professional audio. Okay, where is that stuff? It's down here somewhere. All right, here's one of them. I don't know which one this is, so this one is like,
I'm just snagging headphones, by the way. I'm listening. I'll just be.
oh sure, yeah. This is a sketch where I'm trying to get that vacuum sound a little bit.
Cool.
So it's still pretty Reiki in terms of strumming pattern, and it's a minute 40 and some change. So like it kind of did go on a little bit, but mostly just figuring out how the intervals between chord changes and like the subtleties could work with a little bit of post, but like I was really limited. You get panning and high and low EQ, so you can just kind of like cut, or I guess like bump decibels at a shelf. And then when you go into mastering, there's a master effects set of parameters that you can adjust where it's like low, mid, high, mid, high. And then you can do shelf or like clip. I forget what the other one is. And a few other things. I think the one thing I was playing with was limiting. So like using a limiter to try to like slope a little bit, because the other thing that's goofy that I wasn't trying to get like too lost in is pedal settings. So I was like, okay, like this fuzz pedal has a ton of crunch, and like I don't want like that to come across as clipping. So I was just like, okay, let me try to figure that out, but not spend too much time on it. So just kind of think of the spirit of the vacuum, like low pass filter type of thing we were talking about.
Yeah. Oh, really quick, one thing.
Hmm.
Okay, so if you share your sound, we want to make sure that it's sharing in stereo. And it
Okay.
sounds like it was like I couldn't totally tell.
So share, and then oh, I see. Yeah, it says drop down menu type of thing. Yeah, this should work then.
Okay, cool. Yeah. All
Um,
right, taking
and
it from the top.
should I mute myself? Is
Oh,
that
I don't think it matters that much.
okay?
Yeah. Really different. Okay.
So
Cool.
it's something.
Yeah. Should we okay, yeah. Should we talk about that one or because you mentioned other sketches, should we listen to them like as a group?
So yeah, the other one is like very different, but I'll definitely show you because I think I'm like kind of proud of it. It's just more along the lines of like that complex puzzle that I'm always trying to put together. So like I don't have a prime or like even a B section
Hmm.
in it, but like I created a series of chord changes that I thought was really cool.
Hmm.
And was just like, oh, let me like capture this and then maybe do some like interplay with the um timbre shifts. So
Yeah.
like you start paying attention to the E string and then all of a sudden you're paying attention to the A string and then like it just kind of jumps around.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
I'll need to figure out. Okay, so if I share for stereo, I'm pretty sure I have to find it in here really quick. Um, so we just listened to sketch two, so that must be this one.
Yeah, and also really quick, I'm just looking around for our shared document. Oh, okay, it's way at the very bottom of my. Okay, cool. I found it. Never mind.
Nice.
Cool. Okay. Okay, and then we're writing from the top. Okay, May 20. Okay, so May 30. Okay, sweet. Okay, and now I'm ready to take notes. Cool.
Nice. Yeah. Pretty I didn't want it to be like too like Brian Jones-towny. I still
Mm.
wanted to deviate a little bit, but I thought it was like funny that on the B string, like it's I haven't gotten that far in the course, but maybe it's like a little mixolydian.
Mm. Yeah, I think I'd have to listen to it again to like listen for the Mixolydian things. I was thinking less about like the specific kind of chords and like Roman numeral things and more kind of about production and everything else that we're talking about. But it
Oh,
could be.
sure.
I mean, there's definitely I heard like a five chord in there with like a seventh, like like a dominant seven chord in there somewhere.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So let's I think how to get in the zone. Also, I feel like as far as I can just feel right now that I'm in this sort of like midday like energy dip right
Hmm.
now. And so like I feel like I feel like as we move through the hour, like I'm gonna get like sharper again. I can also just feel like right now it's like if here's where I want to be, like here's where I am like in the morning, like when I'm super caffeinated or whatever. Like right now I'm like a little bit lower. So that's just kind of like apologies if I'm like not quite as sharp as we get going. But yeah, let's just start off by like yeah, if you could just kind of tell me about these two sketches. I'd love to just get your thoughts on them.
Yeah. So the first sketch, or I guess we'll work backwards. The most recent one that I played, um,
And just to be clear, was the most recent one the one that you played first or second?
second.
Okay, cool.
That one, I'm like packing, so all of my notes are kind of crazy, but I can pull up our doc really quick.
Yeah.
Create interesting music. So I believe for the other one, it
Hmm.
was more of the puzzle piece thing, right? Like, so can I make these like interesting chords that have like a return, but there's always a question mark about like what's next? And like there's kind of like this shift that you don't know where it's going to go. And then like there's always a cozy spot that it ends up. It's not like um, really cranking up the neck and then being like, whoa, like, shred time or something. It's like, it's still got this cozy home base, but it's interesting in there, as opposed to like kind of just blocky sounds. Whereas the first sketch is very blocky. It's like, all right, let me play with how harmonics work when there's just kind of like this comfort zone and then like a little bit of variance between like the lowest three notes moving around. Um, and so, yeah, on the second recording that I showed you, um, was mostly focused on composition, and the first recording that I showed you was mostly focused on production, where it's like, okay, can I try to make the walls bounce a little bit as you're listening to it, in a comfortable way. Like when I was doing a lot of the post-production stuff, I was like, oh, this is just really loud, kind of like in a post-rock way where you're just like, oh, there's just a lot of information. Can I like smooth out some of the edges so that it's just got this nice round, almost flat approach that gives you the sensation of volume without being really loud. Um, and yeah, I think a lot of what I put into like we'll focus on the production one, I guess, because that's got the most related to this exercise that we set out to do. Um, when I got to sitting down and doing it, um, once I got something tracked, uh, there's the initial stage of like, okay, I found something. Let me just like get all the voices into like one room, and then let me start a new track, and then just like do clean takes of everything.
Okay, wait, and just really quick, just because I was writing down a note, and I want to make sure that I'm following. This was on the first sketch or the second sketch? First
First
sketch.
first
Okay,
one.
cool. And so you wrote, you played things distorted, and then you were doing another take that's like clean.
Not necessarily. It was like,
Okay.
okay, I know the like measures and how long to play things and what's going to happen when. Like it's basically like find a set of chords, then find a progression and the ratios of, you know, length that you want. Get that stuck in your head, then make a new recording with that kind of like stuck in your head sound and an intention to each track. So it was like, okay, I'm recording the lows right now. Let me like dial these things down, make sure that the lows sound good and they're like massageable in post. And then let me do something like in the middle of the spectrum and on the top end. And then I'll try to like make sure that they kind of mm, blend into each other and they're not like stacked very distinctly on top of each other. Like they all kind of have this uh, special place.
Mhm.
But I didn't get to explore like the drift in voices. Like when we initially did the study on the My Bloody Valentine song, we're like, all right, like there's this unison and then there's like this deviance. And the deviance kind of creates this extra puzzle piece that's fun to experience. Was just kind of crunched on time. Like I think what would be cool and what might be applicable for stuff like this
Mhm.
in exploring like proto minimalism or like I don't know, it's an offshoot of minimalist music. Like I think taking the same set of tools and creating variations on like a daily basis could provide like I like this part of, sketch number two, or like I like the thing that I did on Wednesday, and I like this thing about the low end that I did on Friday, and then like you can try to incorporate all of them into one, mega Zord type of piece. Um, as opposed to getting lucky once and being like, oh, there's this cool thing I like, but like, I ended up tracking this in a bad way and kind of lazy. Like it's it's good as an exercise to not rely on like strokes of luck or these like hot moments where things are working and you just like figure something out and you don't remember how to do it and it just kind of feels like a fluke, but like a lucky one, as opposed to like uh, really spinning the sculpture that you're making around a lot and like messing with it and then building it again and then being like, okay, like I did the nose really good this time and oh, I did the ears really well this time and eventually you'll be able to get all of them right, um, when you're able to identify what you like about each element of it.
Yeah.
Just tedious, it's like a different practice than the sort of like impulsive, let me sit down, put something out and like, I have like these you know, spontaneous moments of brilliance that like turn into this weird snapshot of time as opposed to like, oh, I found something here and let me make it the best, most polished, rich sound that I want. Um, and so I'll have to kind of like work around that a little bit or, make it a uninvested practice. I think going into like trying to track stuff, there's usually a an expectation of at the end of this, I'm going to have something that I get to hit play and be like, oh, this sounds great, job done, as opposed to like when I play shakuhachi, it's just like, oh, I'm going to go and just practice my embouchure and like I might feel really good about how I did with my embouchure, but um, I'll have to do something like that with this, where it's like, oh, I'm just going to practice like finding the right change or finding how to add this little subtle slide before the change from the 5 to the 1 or something. And that was kind of like what was fun about the second one, like the more recent one that I showed you. It was just like, oh, I can sit down and play it and then notice like if I do this one little thing, it changes the mood, or um, omitting the low E string on like chord number 3 lets it like really come in on chord number 4 because you haven't heard it in a second. Like I think we were talking about how it can be a fun game to allow the listener to forget that that element even existed and then to bring it back because they were paying attention to something else. So there's kind of like this sleight of hand game that you can practice.
Mhm.
Um, those were some of the like initial things. It was a pretty rushed session. Like I think I did the first one that I showed you on Friday, and then on Sunday I had the second one, and in between I had like variations of both. Um, but really got lost in trying to figure out what I'm going to do for this show on the 17th.
Wow. Okay, this is fantastic already. I'm taking notes as per usual. And like, yeah. Wow. Well, for one thing, it's really cool that you're this deep into all of it. I'm I'm a proud teacher, you know. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff to talk about. What might be useful is like if we could, because the sketches are really short, if we could listen to both of them one more time, so that I'm kind of just like getting into the world of these pieces.
For sure. Which one would you like to listen to first?
Let's do one and then two.
Okay. Um, let me see which one's going to be which. So uh, the 148 is the vacuum one. That's
Mhm.
one. Yeah.
Uh, I think so. Yeah, let's start with sketch two, and I'll be able to tell you immediately.
Sorry, I was just taking notes. Okay.
Well, yeah, and
Uh,
let's do sketch one now.
nice.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, cool. And so just to make sure that yeah, because I'm kind of putting together a lot of information in my head. The the way that the sketches are labeled was like I think like the opposite of how we were just talking about them. So the one labeled sketch two was what we were calling sketch one, which is the really production oriented one. Okay, cool. I'm just making sure that I'm clear on that. Awesome. Okay, so I've been taking a bunch of notes in our shared document, and you've also got some notes, which is cool. And I'll copy paste these over as well. Cool. Um, cool. I'm gonna do a little screen share here.
Yeah,
Uh,
hold up on my end too, but good for posterity.
yeah. Also just to really, really quick side notes. I don't know if I've texted you about this, but I started like a Substack for Create Interesting Music. It's like a little daily newsletter. I
Oh,
think
cool.
yeah, I think you're a lot closer to the source than the Substack is, so I don't know if there'd be anything new in there. And then just this tab that I have open is this DJ mix that I'm obsessed with, that I'm super into. So that's the other tab. Okay. So we've got all these notes. It's Thank you so much for sharing this. This is really cool. I mean, the things that you're thinking about are really it's really cool. I can tell that you've been paying a lot of attention to conversations and like the things you're talking about, paying attention to like if you take this one string out and then you reintroduce it, you're thinking about like how the guitar parts that you're writing are really like directing the listener's attention and stuff like that. Like it's very hands-on in a cool way. So there are a couple of things, yeah, that we're kind of poking out as places where we could just flesh out an understanding of what's going on here from like a process perspective more.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so I'll just kind of go for the most part, these things that I was putting in here, I was like putting in bold. This one is before I started bolding these specific things that I wanted to talk about. But as far as you were talking about like blend and orchestration and not wanting things to sound like very separate, there
Mhm.
is actually like, or orchestration is more like my word. And I didn't really think about the word orchestration much outside of like orchestral music or whatever until a conversation that I had with someone who's my teacher for a while, whose name is Anthony Coleman, who like played with John Zorn for a long time, and he also was kind of like a trained composer who like went into the downtown scene in the 80s and 90s and stuff. But one of our first conversations was really about orchestration, and we talk about it as much in the context of like pop music or production or whatever as in the context of classical music. But he gave me the example of this one sort of 20th century classical piece where he thought the orchestration was like really bad. And it was like for some small ensemble, and there was like a trombone in it. And whenever the trombone played, it just sounded like it just sounded really bad. Like the notes weren't bad, but the way that it like blended with the ensemble made like no sense. And so it was like all these other instruments sounded very together, and then the trombone sounded very like alone because of how like dynamics and register were being used. Not in the way that like this is a trombone solo, but in the way that just it just wasn't like good like orchestration. And so what you're talking about with wanting to pursue blend, like you want these sounds to kind of like melt into each other, is often like a value in if we just take orchestration to mean like using different sounds in a way that where they kind of add together to create an interesting sort of like composite sound or like mass sound. Yeah, that I think that's a thing that's pretty valued in a lot of places. And there's even like a way that there's this thing that'll even happen in like performance contexts, including in like rock clubs, which is a little bit different than like even like distorted guitar recordings where like if you're playing in a room, whether it's like a room full of like bodies like an audience or like an empty room, like the shape of the room, kind of the reverb of the room and stuff will like actually be like a reverb effect on the sound, and so that will change our feeling of blend and stuff like that. And so like in recordings, I think this is just kind of a basic thing is in mixing, even with like even very realistic mixing, is like applying reverb just enough to make it sound like all the instruments are like in a room together. And so yeah, that's just kind of one thought that was just kind of jumping out at me just as something to touch on. And so yeah, I think that instinct of like wanting things to sound good together is cool. And it's like you're using kind of like mixing tools. And for me, I think of mixing as basically being kind of like orchestration by another name, which is just like making things sound good together. And it's funny how production and mixing are like so intertwined, and sometimes they're separate in that you'll produce something and then run it by a mixing engineer later who will like do more like technical adjustments and stuff. But from an aesthetic perspective, that's just like a value that comes to mind that It's cool. You mentioned like minimalism, and it could be interesting at some point to recommend some just kind of like early minimalism stuff for you to like listen to. I think we've done that a little bit in the past, but it'd be really interesting. This is like if this would be like a side project or something like that. Like I don't think this would be like a central homework thing. But I feel like listening to a lot of music in this like from the 60s and 70s when these ideas were kind of like taking shape was really useful for me as far as like understanding where things came from and how different musicians interpreted them and stuff like that. It's been really liberating because like minimalism kind of comes after music with tons and tons of chords. And so it's kind of getting to this thing that we're talking about, which is like if we're not using this much, if we're not using like crazy amounts of harmonic material, how can we make things interesting? Um, yeah, and so like that just feels relevant, and so I could recommend some recordings there, and that's kind of like a yeah, that's kind of a secondary thing, but it just kind of comes to mind. I think the bigger things that are related to what we're talking about are sort of like in like questions of like intuition or like intuitive approaches versus more kind of like planned approaches. Um, and yeah, I think you were talking about a lot of stuff here that was very related to that. And so there's this I so we've got intuition, we've got planned approaches. There's a word that I want to introduce that's a thing that composers talk about, which is like pre-composition, which is like a stage that many composers, probably not all, but many composers will like go through when they're writing. I'm gonna add another word here, which is like constructivism, which is just another idea that's kind of in the loop here. Um, yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I just kind of want to give some context for this. So I'm just kind of like, I'm about to say a bunch of stuff. So I'm kind of like, I'm shifting into it.
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, I think the fact that you have been as in touch with a sort of like first thought, best thought approach to recording or writing and recording and stuff like that has like a lot of value. And I think like long term, it's very good to be in touch with that. And this is something that I'm really actively trying to like cultivate in myself more. Um, and I think it plays a yeah, I think it plays a really important role. I think that a lot of what we're working on together is kind of about getting like under the hood a little bit and giving you more tools and giving you more of an understanding of what you're doing and what's going on. And even as we're doing this, like all the things that you're thinking about here, you're really thinking about what you're doing. You're being very hands-on and engaged with all of it. Um, both as far as like how it relates to the guitar and also like how it relates to a lot of the production decisions that you're using, which is also great. And so big picture, the way that I think about these approaches, like sort of first thought, best thought approaches or like intuitive approaches versus processes that use a lot of sort of like constructivism or pre-compositional processes, which I can describe in this conversation. Like they both play a role, but I think in the grand scheme of sort of like an artist's journey like through life, they can be approached at different times. And I think of all of it as being like if I feel like I'm not in control of what I'm doing, or I feel like I don't fully understand what's going on, that'll be sort of like a gut indicator to me that I should try to dig deeper into what I'm doing, which will mean this sort of more like editing oriented approach, or more of like an approach where I'm really digging into the materials and trying to make very, very conscious decisions. And so that's kind of like if I feel like I'm not going deep enough, like I'm just like kind of skimming on the surface and like I feel like I'm maybe this is a harsh way to put it, but there are times where I feel like I'm letting myself get away with like bullshit or something. And I think what I mean by that is just that like I'm making decisions that I can't back up. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's kind of nice, but I can hear a lot of things about it that feel half baked to me and that bothers me. Then I'll be like, I have to dig deeper into this. And then on the other hand, if I've been really in like a revising and editing hole and I feel trapped in some way, then I'll be more likely to adopt a sort of like first thought, best thought approach and be like, okay, like I'm just gonna like move forward and like do things. And so I think for me, it's like the first thought, best thought things more about like liberation, and trusting my gut and stuff like that. And then the more kind of constructivist thing, which I'll just say like constructivism, building, assembling, like assembling from parts, is like, yeah, it's like if I want to go deeper, I'll use like sort of constructivist strategies. And then I think the way that this relates in the bigger picture to like an artist's life or an artist's work is that there will be some people, some incredible artists who will go through entire chapters of life, like years or maybe decades, where they're really doing one thing or the other thing. And sometimes they'll just do one thing or the other thing for their whole lives. But often at a certain point, they'll feel like they've maxed out something and they'll start to change their practice as a result. And so, an example of this that's a very like 20th century classical thing. And I mentioned that some of the 20th century classical stuff just because that's kind of where a lot of my like compositional training comes from. Like there's this composer, Pierre Boulez, who wrote some stuff in the early and mid 50s that was just like totally like generated by like number systems, and like he didn't really care about the sounds at all in a way that's like super constructivist because everything's happening according to like rules. And at a certain point he realized that he wanted to just change some notes because he wanted it to sound different. And relative to how we're working, that's all pretty like constructivist. It's very, very hands-on, but for him, he reached a point where he had to just like insert his taste in there and be like, I'm going to start changing things. And I think by like the time he was in his like 40s and 50s, he's basically just, I'm sure he was editing and stuff and he liked like form a lot, but he was like basically just writing what he wanted to write without the same amount of like justification for every decision. um yeah, and so it's just somebody that comes to mind who like went from this very detailed way of working into a more kind of like open or slightly open-ended way of working. Yeah, and so I think it makes sense that right now you're using these more kind of like detailed ways to write and generate material, and really edit it and learn how to edit it. And I think part of what's going on here is that when you go deep like this, you're also kind of like almost like tuning your intuition to the possibility of like a new set of outcomes. And so, like, if you really dig in right now, you're also kind of giving yourself in with the end result, like something you can listen to, and the act of both making it and listening to it will kind of point your intuition towards solutions that, like, this time were very laborious to reach, but next time you could just start there and be like, I'm going to do something like this. But to even know what that something like that is, you had to like do all this, much more hands-on stuff. So does that make sense as far as sort of like a back and forth?
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. And yeah, I'd love to hear like if this is like resonating with you, or if you have like thoughts or feelings or responses to
Um,
this.
yeah, I would say that it just depends on like context. So m music has always been a emotional response, right? And like when you start to factor in like consideration and logical thinking and coming back to a drawing board multiple times, um, in a non-rehearsal way, right? Like there's still the work is still unfinished, as opposed to like, oh, it's done and now we're just practicing it, or I'm playing it at shows or something.
Mhm.
Um, It's yeah, it's reduces the catharsis of like creation, right? Like sitting down in a session and just being like, cool, done. There we go. Like now I just practice it. As opposed to like, all right, let me make sure that this is a comprehensive message that is like to the point. There's no like if you want it to be super trimmed down and just like direct, then like just capturing like your intention with how you're expressing the message versus expression for the sake of expression.
Mhm.
It's just a different world. So like um yeah, there's like things that I guess I will need to be aware of, mm, subtextually, just like sitting down and it, like engaging in this type of activity.
Mhm.
Uh, it's easy to armchair, but like when you're actually doing it,
Yeah.
knowing, okay, this is I'm supposed to feel this way, or like I'm, in this process, I have some patience. Like, let
Yeah.
me just go through it rather than like, oh yeah, like I have this expectation that I'm not really conscious of, and
Yeah.
that's what's getting me down or tripping me up or making me feel like this is like a waste of time or something.
Yeah.
So that's one of the big takeaways that I got. I agree with you that like in terms of like production and like building a finished product, there's a lot in post that like tools will help greatly with in terms of like saving time and then just being able to accomplish what you want to do. Uh, I think that'll be kind of like a funny thing going forward. I'm pretty sure if there's stuff that like I can't that requires a lot of TLC in post, I'll probably just like go super rough and just be like, the idea is here. If I book studio time and get like a really good take,
Hmm.
I'll be able to do all that massaging and like work with a professional on like getting it set up.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. And then I think for like a lot of the other things, when I find like a cool sound, I'll just like create a diagram and be like, these are the exact settings I was using.
Yeah.
This is where my tone and volume were, whatever. So I can try to recreate it. And then it might be a cool like fail safe to capture that stuff and then double check that you can do it without touching anything and then just like reset everything and try to follow the diagrams that you built and then be like, okay, like, is this the right thing? Yeah, did I give myself a map to return to where I thought was a good place? It's just a good practice, I guess.
Yeah, that's a really cool idea. That's a yeah, and actually something related to that that could also be like kind of a time saving thing on that note, like rather than writing things down, although writing things down can be really cool too, is this thing that I saw my friend Leah Bertucci do, who's like an experimental person who used to do a lot of underground New York stuff. And now she kind of like flies places to play shows, which is great for her. But she was using my amp to play a show that I'd organized on a rooftop, and she just like took a picture of her amp settings, and then she just had it. And so writing things down is cool. And another kind of fast option could just be like if you just take pictures of like exactly what your pedal board looks like, exactly what the different things look like. That could be like a small time saving thing too. This is a very low level comment, but it feels related to all of this. Yeah, so I had a couple other things I wanted to touch on, and also because we've got like 15 minutes. Um, as far as talking about performance stuff, I'd love to do that. And it would be cool to spend more than like 5 to 10 minutes talking about it. But yeah, do you think you'd be able to come through tomorrow?
It's at noon.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that should work. I don't think I have any plans other than packing. Um, so yeah, I should be able to make it.
Cool. Yeah, and if you can only make it, for like an hour or whatever, that's totally fine too. But yeah, it'd just be nice to be able to talk about it a little bit without feeling like we need to have comprehensive answers after like 5 minutes or something. Because it'd be cool to talk about it in greater depth.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna take the three options that I'm considering and experiment with them a little bit in the next few hours, and then maybe I'll have some notes and be like, you know, this is my what I anticipate going well and going wrong with approach A, B, and C.
Yeah. Okay, so I had a couple of other things I wanted to talk about with these recordings. One of them, well, okay, actually, big question first. Like, how do you feel about the outcomes of these recordings relative to where your writing was, let's say, like a month ago or 2 months ago?
Good. I really was hyped on the second one that I showed you, just because like that is has been a hurdle. Like
Mm.
I'll find these really cool like sonic nooks and be like, oh, this is really great. I can figure this out sound wise, but in terms of movement, that's always been a problem. And so finding movements that like are a step in the right direction, feel good. Yeah, I'd say there's still like some attention to be paid towards the information that I'm capturing. And like the term orchestration is really good. Like I think you can orchestrate a single instrument, especially when
Mm,
there's six strings on them, right?
absolutely.
Like when I'd use like composition software, it's like, oh, this sounds crummy because there's not that like hand touch of how I would play this chord or these series of notes.
Totally.
And so I think that that's something to pay attention to when I'm like recording. And it comes through like practice and stuff. So I think this is all kind of servicing other things we've talked about, which is like, oh, repetition is helpful. And like, I do need to curb my impulse to complete things and just maybe have the expectation to like track it a couple times and um, throw away my perfect demo and maybe there's something even better and around the corner if I do it again. Um, yeah, I would say that captures a lot of it. I still do want that like, you know, primal connection to sound that I've enjoyed
Totally.
for so long. But
Yeah. Yeah. And then as far, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And so there's more to talk about here, but just that thing that you mentioned, still wanting to have this connection to sound that's very like immediate or like primal. Yeah, I mean, for me, one of the ways that I relate to this, is like even if I'm doing this more kind of like editing based approach or more of a can maybe in some ways a constructivist approach, part of what I'm getting is like an end result that really is satisfying to what I'm going for, as opposed to something that gets me like 70% there, which is
mhm.
often like a good like the beginning of something that feels very promising to me. Um, yeah, and I'm wondering like how do you feel about like even if you're going through this editing process, getting an end result that does that versus like the importance of getting it on the first go.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the intention of like the work. A
Yeah.
lot of a lot of the work that I've done before is like, let me just take a photo. Like I need to just capture what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And that is perfect in itself, as opposed to having like well intentions and then not being able to like fully cultivate what I'm hoping to get out of it. And then being like, well, this works for me, but I know that like if I was a complete stranger, I'd be like, yeah, this is a good idea, but it's lacking something that has a shelf life. Like that was the intention that I came to this class with, was like, I want to create music that has a shelf life that is non-personal, like it just exists as a good set of songs or
Yeah.
sounds.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. And then as far as also like, I mean, artists who have different ways of covering this, basically where like on one end, maybe somebody will work on one thing for 20 years or something. And on the other end, somebody will only ever make things that they can make in one go. I think we all have a lot of agency to like navigate that. And even in something like indie music or like alternative music, I would think of like Stereolab as a band that's very like first thought, best thought, like in their approach. Like there's an interview with their singer where she was like, yeah, then we would like track the guitars for 10 songs, and then we'd track the drums for 10 songs, and then we'd track the vocals for 10 songs, and then that was the record, and then you put it on the shelf, and then you do another one, which is one way to go versus like the Radiohead approach or something of like trying to like make these like perfect objects. And I love both a lot. And I also just have a different relationship with them in some ways, but at the same time, like I mean, just like Dots and Loops, especially the Stereohead album, like the Stereo Lab album. I've listened to it so many times. Like, and even though it was made in that way, and it's surrounded by tons of other records that I haven't listened to anywhere near as many times, like they got that gem. So it's interesting to think about all of this, but also kind of in the world of like minimalism, like there are a lot of people, this musician, like I think his name, well, one of the people who works this way is like Charlemagne Palestine, who is like I think a downtown person, maybe like a Fluxus person in the 60s and 70s, like moved to Switzerland or something. But I think he really maybe he has some pieces, but they're pretty loose around the edges. And then like a composer like Lamont Young or something would be somebody who worked on the well-tuned piano for like 20 years before performing it. Or I see a lot of other people who are doing kind of like durational but like improvisational kind of drone related improvised music in New York like very frequently. And then there are also people like this musician named Eliane Radique, where like again, like one work would be like 3 or 4 years. And so yeah, and I maybe initially when I started to get back into the more kind of like this amount of time is the amount of time that it took to make it and perform it, and that's what it is. Like I think maybe I had some like, yeah, but like there are people who have used this hour in way more efficient ways, or like much more like deep ways in some ways, but they spent 3 years doing it. But after a while, I've realized that it doesn't really affect my enjoyment of it. I maybe appreciate them in different ways, but yeah. So I don't have like a one way is necessarily better than another. I guess I'm just kind of offering some context for this sort of like the extremes of shelf life, or thing that's intended to be consumed once. And then actually just one more thing on that topic. At the risk of rambling, I'll keep it super short. There's this book of writings by John Cage called Silence, and he has an essay about contemporary music where he replaces the word music with milk. And just like through the whole thing. And so at one point he's like speaking for a moment about contemporary milk. And the important, the idea is that you need to get new milk. Like you can't use milk from 3 months ago. Like you need new milk. And so that's a perspective. Yeah. This is a little bit more rambly than I'd wanted to go, but these are just maybe some contextualizations around those elements of like a practice. Um yeah. Oh, and then okay. So then on the subject of this thing, I put in bold the Segovia clip. Andres Segovia, guitar. There's this one clip that's just unbelievable. Yeah, this is this really great classical guitarist. Okay, we've got this ad. And then in the 1920s, okay, let's get to the part where he's okay. Oh wait, do I need to share my sound?
Yeah, you
Okay.
might.
Yeah.
It's a little choppy.
It has many different colors, many different timbers, and it is necessary to develop those quality of the instrument. For instance, if you have to play sound that the same thing. All that has different color. And for instance, what it is called here the pizzicato. Cello. Brass. This pianissimo. It is not really as listening to music, but better dreaming with music.
All right. And so he probably says more good stuff, but that I'd only ever seen the clip within that where he's just talking about the different instruments and creating them on the guitar. But yeah, just like the power of pulling that many sounds from the guitar is, yeah, it just seems very directly related to what we were talking about. Yeah. So I can go a few minutes over. I feel like I touched on some of the things that we were talking about, and there were some other things that we lost track of. And actually, okay, so I would love to ask you if you have any other questions, and yeah, maybe go a few minutes over, just clear any of those things up. But one of the other things that came to mind that's really that was important to mention earlier is that like it's really cool to hear the types of experimentation that you're doing with production. And I think also an important distinction between something like how you're working right now and what they did on like Loveless with My Bloody Valentine is like I think that on that record they have a love for a lot of like lo-fi music, and their aesthetic is clearly like coming out of lo-fi music and it's aiming towards lo-fi music, but they're using a lot of very like hi-fi tools to accomplish like a very lo-fi sound. And so I think one of the biggest production level differences that I was hearing between what you were showing me and like I think what we got in the chorus or the outro to Only Shallow, yeah, is that I could hear the connections, but I think there were some things that they're doing, yeah, that just sounded like they were using higher fi tools. Like, I mean, there were some low pass things that sound like a real, not just like a scoop on the high frequencies, but like really cutting them out. And then with those like side chaining things, like those are things that I can do very easily in like a DAW. And like I think the restriction of the 8 track or the system that you're using to record is a really interesting restriction, and it creates a sound that I think is really effective. And I think it gets to the point a lot more quickly than a lot of DAW oriented productions where you'll record something and it won't sound quite right. Like this, the way that this machine that you're using kind of colors everything is really nice. But yeah, that was just one potential thing that we could. I just wanted to mention that would be a way to sort of bridge a potential gap there, if that's something that's bothering you, or if that's something that you feel like you would want to try to achieve. Um, and then yeah, just two other things that were coming to mind that maybe we could talk about at some point, or we could talk about quickly now is like one, I mean, our goals here had a lot to do with like production and stuff like that. But a lot of the ways that you were thinking about like writing for the guitar, orchestrating for the guitar, um, and also writing chord progressions, like I think also have a lot to do with everything that we've been talking about harmony and stuff recently, everything we've been talking about with harmony and stuff recently. And yeah, so we talked about this a little bit when there was something when you were talking about the things that you felt were successful from this recording session or from this sketching project. Yeah, wow. I feel like I'm really not at 100% right now. But yeah, just thinking about like, yeah, it would be cool to talk about, for the sake of better understanding them, some of the harmonic strategies that you're using and how that might port over to other things. So yeah, these are thoughts that are a little more scattered than I'd like them to be. But they are thoughts. Yeah, is there anything else that we should touch on for today?
I think that's good. I think one thing I could do is do a study of the successful chord change piece that I played second and try to articulate like what about it I enjoy.
Yeah.
Mm. From like a practical level where it's like, oh, like there are these notes in this register and then it jumps to this register and
Yeah.
then you forget and then you remember and like just like all those little pieces and try to like adapt it. Um, yeah, I I'll have to find some time. It's going to be pretty light. Um, I might like maybe join while I'm traveling,
Mhm.
uh, like pre-show and just be like, hey, like I've got like these sounds, this setup, whatever.
Mhm.
But it's going to be busy. I've got this weekend and then I go on a work trip and then I'm back and I move 2 days after I'm back and then I
Wow.
to go to Washington to see like all of my family and play this show
Yeah.
like same week. So it's going to be interesting. But yeah, I'll figure it out and um I'll let you know. I'll just keep you posted.
Cool. Yeah. Oh, I have one more thought related to the harmony that I think was one of the things that I'd wanted to touch on, which is that like one of the interesting differences to me between those two sections is like, or between the two sketches, is that the second one feels like it's touching more on the world of, triads and seventh chords and stuff like that. And the first one feels like it's more in the world of like power chords.
Mm.
And those are just interesting. I guess the first one's more like distorted too, and then the second one, there's still some saturation, maybe some like lighter distortion, but it's more like, the harmony has more notes in it, and we can hear the notes more as opposed to being kind of like the distortion crunch. And they're both really effective. And to me, I have different associations with those different approaches to harmony. Yeah. And so, yeah, that was an interesting thing that I observed that'd be cool to dig into at some point.
For sure.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, great work with these. It's really cool to see how things are developing, and hopefully talk to you soon.
Yeah. Thanks, Cole.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. See ya.
With something like guitar lessons, like I want to play that Robert Fripp solo, or like this is the sound I'm going for, versus with this class, it's more about finding your sound, which I think is extremely important if you're trying to create like meaningful music that connects with people, but also with yourself. Like none of us are blank slates. Everybody coming into this course identifies in some way or another as an artist or a musician who, again, hasn't necessarily unlocked what they want to unlock.
I'm currently opening up a limited number of 45-minute strategy calls. On the calls, we're going to 1, get serious about your goals, 2, identify what's holding you back, and 3, make a roadmap together for how you can move forward and really achieve those goals. And after that, if it's a fit, we'll talk about working together. So if you're ready to grow as a guitarist, as an artist, and maybe even as a human being, there should be a little button below where you can click to book a time. So bring your story and we'll do the rest together. See you soon.